want honesty and practicality, and what they see in Washington is the opposite of that. We need someone who's going to step up and represent millions of Americans who don't feel well represented by either of these parties, and particularly don't feel well represented by Donald Trump or Joe Biden.
I'm Julie Pace, Washington Bureau Chief for the Associated Press, and this is Ground Game. The 2020 presidential race was set until it wasn't. Justin Amash, the Michigan congressman and former Republican, says he's exploring a third-party bid. Amash says he thinks there are millions of Americans who want an alternative to President Donald Trump and presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden.
There are millions of people who won't vote for either one regardless. They're not going to go vote. We don't have 100% voter turnout. So you're going to have lots of people who don't like either of these candidates.
So he's preparing to run as a libertarian. Justin Amash was cheered by Democrats when he left the Republican Party to become an independent and started openly criticizing President Trump. News that Amash is eyeing a third-party presidential run has Democrats and a small crop of anti-Trump Republicans not feeling quite so friendly toward the Michigan congressman. AP reporter Dave Eggert is based in Amash's home state of Michigan and talked to the congressman today. Dave, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
In some ways, this came as a surprise, even though Amash has been flirting with the prospect of a third-party run for the last couple of weeks. What does he say is his rationale for moving forward with this effort?
You know, Congressman Amash has been, I think, increasingly vocal in recent years about his criticism of the two-party system. You know, he's saying that millions of Americans would not vote for President Trump or presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden. You know, he's contending he is the type of person that could attract votes from these disaffected people that either aren't happy with those two options or, you know, may not vote at all.
This, of course, is something that we hear, if not every presidential election season, during a lot of them, this idea that people are dissatisfied with both parties, and yet we haven't had an independent candidate who's made real headway, in quite some time. Does Amash, is he pretty clear-eyed about the challenges of launching this kind of effort?
Yeah, I think he is pretty clear-eyed. You know, he also says, he thinks he could win, but clearly it's a near impossible feat. I think he's obviously gotten more attention nationally because of his stance. Last year he left the Republican Party and became an independent when he decided to support an impeachment inquiry into the president. So I think his national profile has been raised, yet I wouldn't say he's a household name, nationally. I'm sure he's known more in his district in Western Michigan, but he'd obviously have a lot of work to do to attract votes in this environment.
Certainly the reaction that I was hearing after the immediate announcement was mostly from Democrats who were saying, oh, no, we don't want to see this happen because they look to 2016. And, there are a lot of reasons why Democrats argue Hillary Clinton lost. But one of the things that they point to is that you did have a couple of third-party candidates, Gary Johnson, who ran as a libertarian, which is what Amash is trying to do this time, Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, who picked off a small percentage of votes. You're based in Michigan. In Michigan, third-party candidates won 5% of the vote in 2016. I mean, that's not insignificant.
Oh, yeah, it was a very significant factor in the outcome. I mean, I think in 2012, when President Obama won re-election, third-party candidates attracted less than 1% of the vote. So that's a couple 100,000 votes 4 years later that did not go to either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump.
In a state that is it was decided by a very small margin and presumably will be close again. What does Amash say about the likelihood that if he follows through on this, that he could block Joe Biden's path, that he would essentially hand over a second term to Donald Trump?
I asked him about that. I mean, his answer was basically no one really knows what'll happen. He's contending that even in 2016, that's not necessarily the case, that people that voted for Gary Johnson, may have voted for, Hillary Clinton. He really just seems to believe that the public needs a third alternative. He said he's heard from people that thinks it could actually help Biden he's heard from other people that thinks it could help Trump. He doesn't seem to think that there's clear evidence that, his campaign would have an effect either way. He largely seems to be contending that, the public just needs an alternative, and he's the person at this point to provide that. He had been operating as an independent in Congress, and now he's going to run as a libertarian. He's always had libertarian views, but he also conceded he has some work to do at the Libertarian Convention, to actually secure that nomination as well.
Yeah, not a done deal that he actually could run as the Libertarian nominee. There's a party convention in May in Texas that he actually would have to go through. So, Dave, you're based in Michigan, where Amash is a congressman. What has his reputation in the state been, since he became a member of Congress, and especially since he became more of a national political figure with his decision to leave the GOP?
I think among the public, he's respected as an independent thinker. It's interesting to watch him with the Michigan congressional delegation. I mean, he's always kind of sort of stood apart. You'll get these sort of bipartisan announcements sometimes on legislation or deals that have been struck, and he's not really in the Republican camp or the Democratic camp. Even when he was in the state legislature for a short time, he was one of those lawmakers who tended to vote no, and kind of he still does to this day explain every vote on social media and why he came down the way he did. It's interesting. I mean, I think he's one of those people, like if you go to a town hall of his, even the people that vehemently disagree with him, whether it's on impeachment or it's Democrats that may not agree with his policies, I think a lot of them respect him because he takes the time to lay out his beliefs, and he's also very active, having town halls, communicating with the public. Whether that could translate to a national campaign, that's obviously a much bigger challenge. He's not represented a couple of counties in Michigan in that scenario.
It certainly is interesting watching how he has really been one of the conservatives. He's quite conservative, but one of the conservatives who, through the Trump era, has been extremely loyal to their principles. We've seen a lot of members of that kind of Tea Party wave, which he was a part of, who are, Mark Meadows, who's the chief of staff at the White House. We saw Mick Mulvaney, who was the chief of staff at the White House, who were suddenly backing, big government programs that were going to add to the deficit, the kind of things that the Tea Party movement was really opposed to. Is that really Amash's brand in Michigan, that he is just this dyed-in-the-wool conservative who's going to hold his ground no matter where his party goes?
Yeah, I think that's his brand for sure. I mean, he was kind of like that even before President Trump. He wasn't afraid to kind of speak his mind against, Republican leadership in Congress. I think he's probably gotten more attention now because Trump is the president. But yeah, no, that's definitely his brand. I mean, he's one that's not afraid to speak his mind. He was the lone voice out there in the Republican in Congress that was for impeachment. One of the reasons, or one of the things going on behind the scenes as he considered running for reelection was, some of his sort of longtime supporters, like the DeVos family in Western Michigan. Betsy DeVos is now the education secretary, but other members of the family, they decided to no longer back him for Congress. I don't know how much that weighed into his decision. He's clearly, there's been a sort of a price to be paid, in political circles for him.
Certainly President Trump has weighed in with his thoughts on the possible third party run. And Amash is obviously on his radar because, as you say, he was the lone member of the House who voted for impeachment, and has been pretty vocal in other criticism of Trump. And one of the things that Trump pointed to is, of course he has to do this because he was never going to win re-election to his congressional seat. How real is that? What would his prospects have been running for re-election as an independent, even in a seat that he has held for several terms?
I think it was pretty real. I talked to a strategist today that had seen some internal polling. I mean, it would have been really tough for Amash to win re-election, especially as an independent. I mean, it just shows again the issues with kind of a third party candidate running, even for his own congressional seat. The Republicans, there was a pretty spirited primary going on right now there with some well-financed opponents, people who had been able to raise money. I think it would have been very difficult for Representative Amash to win re-election. One thing that this may do going forward is if Amash had run for Congress again, there was, some hope among Democrats that they may be able to flip the seat. They're still going to try that, and they've got, that's an area of the state where now Governor Gretchen Whitmer did well. It's kind of a conservative. He represents a conservative district, but it's been changing demographically over time, becoming more liberal voters have moved into the district. And I think it would have been tough, but the one thing with him not running for Congress is it may help the Republicans hold on to the seat.
Fascinating that Democrats were hoping to use Amash's third-party bid in the congressional race to win that seat, and now are nervous that a third-party bid in the presidential could cost them the White House. I love politics. This is exactly why. Dave Eggert, he's AP reporter based in Lansing, Michigan. Thank you so much for being with us and great interview with Amash today.
Thank you, Julie.
That's it for this episode of Ground Game. We'll be here every step of the way during this extraordinary moment in American politics and American life, giving you all the news you need to know. Be sure to tell a friend about us, and please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. Some of the details of our discussion may have changed by the time you hear this. For up-to-date developments on all of your news, head over to apnews.com.
From the Westwood One Podcast Network.